So here we go again. I hope you're doing well. This is Dr. Esa. So today we're going to look at the adjectives, and adjectives are probably the first a little bit more complicated topic here. So make sure before you start this watching this video that you will go through the nouns and that you're familiar with the nominative, genitive, dative, and accusative cases and the case endings. So that will help you enormously. So let's start with the adjectives in English. So adjective is a word that modifies a noun, or obviously can also modify or describe another adjective. So simple example, a good book. So obviously book is the noun and good is the adjective that describes or modify what type of book we are talking about. So we have different categories of adjectives that are being used in English. We can use adjectives as well, adjectively as attribute or predicate, and we can use them substantively. So these same categories we'll also find in Greek. So when we're talking about attributive adjective, here's an example. He is a good student. So grammatically, we could say that the adjective good attributes a quality to the noun student. That's why we talk about attributive adjective. Then when we have a predicate adjective, perhaps the simplest way to think about it is that adjective comes after the verb. The student is good. Now you can see that there's a verb to be between the noun student and the adjective good. So it is predicate adjective. The adjective good predicates something on the noun student. And obviously here the important thing is to notice the position of the verb in relation to the adjective. In attributive position, it comes prior to the noun, and in the predicate position, it is after. Adjectives can also be used substantively, as if the adjective were a noun. So here's an example. The good need not bother, but the evil are welcome. Notice that the underlined words are adjectives, as we would usually recognize that good and evil are adjectives, but since they're attached to a definite article, they are used substantively as if they were nouns. Another example, out with the old and in with the new. Then we also have some phrases that function adjectively. The man on the street is walking away. The man on the street is a prepositional phrase, and sitting on the dock is great relaxation. So let's take a look at the adjectives in Greek. And as I mentioned before, it is very important that you have learned and memorized the case endings for each one of the nouns, masculine, feminine, and neuter. So basic concepts. So adjectives are used to modify noun, just like in English. Greek adjectives have, like nouns, gender, number, and case. So obviously gender, masculine, feminine, neuter, number, singular or plural, and case, nominative, genitive, dative, and accusative. So each adjective is either masculine, feminine, and neuter. The same adjective is either singular or plural. And the same adjective is either nominative, genitive, dative, or accusative in it with regard to its case. Now the important part of the adjectives is that adjective must agree with the noun it modifies. So in gender, if you have a good boy, so the good must be in masculine and singular, as the boy is in masculine and singular. Has to agree in number, so singular or plural, and also the case. So if the noun is in genitive case, so has to be the adjective. So let's take an example. He agathe ecclesia. Hopefully you have learned some of the vocabulary and so that you can try to make some sense out of this phrase. So the translation is the good church. But before we go into the translation, let me take a look at some of the endings and how we actually are able to parse and analyze this particular adjectival phrase. So we have here in the gray box, you can see the word agathos, and you can see dash e and dash omicron noon. So this is what you'd actually see in your vocabulary or in a dictionary. And I will go through the dictionary usage again, but you can see the agathos, the sigma, indicates that this is the masculine singular form of the word agathos. Then you can see the next one is eta, and that indicates that it is the feminine form. So agathos is masculine, agathe would be the feminine form, and then when we look at the omicron noon or on ending, that would be the neuter ending. Now obviously remember, these are all nominative singular forms of the adjective in masculine, feminine, and neuter forms. So this is how you would see the adjective agathos or good in your vocabulary, and this is a way that he ecclesia, church, you would see in your vocabulary. So the translation of the phrase is the good church. And notice I have underlined here the feminine form of the adjective. The reason why it is feminine form is because he ecclesia is a feminine word. Now you would have to know from your vocabulary that it actually is he ecclesia. Now, if you remember that most of the adjectives, most of the nouns that end in alpha are actually feminine words, that might give it out. However, you should really memorize the gender as you are memorizing the words in the vocabulary. So hence, agathe corresponds with the ecclesia. So both are nominative, nominative feminine singular word. So the adjective has to correspond with the noun in gender, in this case feminine, number, which is here obviously singular, and in case, which here we have is obviously nominative. So the noun and adjective are feminine, singular, and nominative. Let's take another example. So ho agathos adelphos, the good brother. And now you can see here that agathos is the same word that we used in our previous example. However, it has the masculine ending. Why is that? Because adelphos is also a masculine word. So ho, adelphos, and agathos are both masculine, singular, nominative. So let's take an example of a sentence. So now you can see here another type of example. Blepo ton piston adelphon. Now we have something a little bit different going on. We have a sentence, and let me translate that for you. I see the faithful brother. And because the adelphos is in accusative case, it's the direct object of the verb blepo, so I see the brother. So this is in accusative case. Ho adelphos becomes ton adelphon, as you can recognize by the final nun here. So when we have the adjective pistos, now it also has to be in the singular masculine, and in this situation specifically in accusative case. Blepo ton piston adelphon. We cannot say blepo ton pistos adelphon. No, it has to be in the same case, since it is modifying that brother. So this is very important to be able to connect the two words, the noun and the adjective, and always remember that they have to correspond in gender, number, and case. So here you see a whole chart that has the adjectives. Now, as you can see, singular and plural, and masculine, feminine, and neuter. And the cases, nominative, genitive, dative, accusative. We also have the vocative here, which we don't have to worry about at this point. So if you have learned the case endings of masculine, feminine, and neuter nouns, then you are well equipped to see how the adjectives use the same exact pattern as they conjugate. Now, take for example the adjective agathos. Remember that agathos is an adjective, so it can be masculine and it can be feminine, or it can be neuter. Now, how do we recognize that it's a masculine? By looking at the ending here. Same way as we would say logos is a masculine and graphe is feminine and ergon is neuter. Notice all of those are different nouns, because remember a very important thing. Nouns can only have one gender, right? So logos is always masculine word. He graphe is always a feminine word, and to ergon is always a neuter word. So nouns do not switch back and forth between genders. However, the adjectives have a form, or they can take any one of the three genders based on the words that they are connected to. So agathos, or good, as an adjective can be in masculine, it is agathos, in feminine it is agathe, and in neuter it is agathon. So, but we have to remember that this is the nominative form. Then we have all the other cases, and also we have the plural form in nominative, genitive, dative, and accusative. So this pattern follows the masculine nouns. So agathos in genitive becomes agathou, dative agatho, accusative agathon. And now if we go to the plural forms, agathoi in nominative, genitive agathon, dative agathois, and accusative agathous. And same way when we look at the feminine form of the adjective agathos, in nominative it becomes agathe, feminine genitive singular agathes, dative agathe, notice the iota subscript, and accusative is agathen. Then when we go to the plural forms, agathai, agathon, agathais, and agathas. And finally, when we look at the neuter form of the adjective, the nominative case would be in singular agathon, genitive agathou, dative agatho, and accusative agathon. And then in plural nominative agatha, agathon genitive, dative agathois, and accusative agatha. And notice again, nominative and accusative are identical in both plural and singular forms. So make sure to go through this chart, and if you have learned the nouns, you should have no problems recognizing and understanding this chart as well. Now this second chart follows exactly the same pattern. It just that we have a different word here. We have the word dikaios, which is just, upright, or righteous. So in feminine nominative, dikaios, masculine nominative, singular dikaios, and feminine nominative, we have dikaia and neuter dikaion. So this follows the same pattern, so I will not read these words, but you can study it on your own. So now you have learned the basic way to form the adjective and how it corresponds to the noun in number, gender, and case. So then let's see how the adjective is actually used. So the first one is the attributive use. Remember, we had in English the example, a good boy. So the adjective good attributes a quality to the noun boy. So let's see how we construct that way of using Greek adjectives. So there are two possible positions of the adjective, and this is what can make the Greek attributive usage a little bit complicated in relation to the predicate usage. So here you can see ho agathos logos or ho logos ho agathos. Notice now that there's an article in front of the adjective. Now notice in this second example we have an article in front of the noun and in front of the adjective. Now both translations for these phrases would be the good word. Just because we have two articles does not make a difference in the translation. Obviously, it is impossible, grammatically speaking, to translate into English the word the good. It just does not make any sense. Now, is there a difference in meaning? Well, yes and no. The first example, this one here, places slightly more emphasis on the adjective here, but it would really depend on the context whether that would have any significance. But there are two different ways, as you can see here, that the attributive adjective can be used. The most important thing here, as you think about the attributive usage of the adjective, is that article always precedes the adjective. Now here's the mantra that you should remember. It's what I call the AAA slogan. Article in front of the adjective is attributive. So whenever you see article in front of an adjective, whether it's this way or here, the article in front of the adjective, you would always translate it attributively. So the agathos is attributing the quality of goodness to the word. And just because the noun here is before the adjective makes no difference. Both are to be translated as the good word. So that was the attributive usage of adjective. Now we look at the predicative use of the article. Notice the boy is good. The adjective makes an assertion about the noun or predicates a quality to the noun. So there are two possible positions of the adjective in relation to the noun. So here you can see the example, ho logos agathos, or agathos ho logos. Notice that the translation, perhaps surprisingly, is the word is good in both cases. So the verb here is obviously not existing. As you can see, there's no such thing as a verb here. However, it is implied in this noun sentence construction. So noun plus predicate adjective means or equals a complete sentence. Now notice there is no article immediately that precedes the adjective. Notice this space here. In both of the examples, there is no article. Remember, that's why I told you in the previous slide, the important mantra is that when the article precedes the adjective, then you need to translate the phrase attributively. So a good word. But when that's not the case, then we have to translate predicatively. So that is why ho logos agathos is the word is good and not the good word or a good word. Same thing here. Even though the word order is different, it doesn't make a difference. Agathos ho logos means the word is good. If you feel slightly confused at this point, you can stop the video and go back to your workbook, do some exercises, or go over the video again. But let me take the substantive usage and then I will review the differences between the three uses of the adjective. So remember, the substantive usage is when the adjective is used as if it was a noun. So the adjective functions as a noun, and here's some example. So ho agathos, he agathe, hoi agathoi, and hoi nekroi. So ho agathos means the good man. Now literally means the good, but because it's a masculine form of the adjective, the man is implied. Now, you might not always use the word man here, but if we had a context, we would come up with some different ideas. But generally speaking, it would be the good man. So taking the hint from that, you can probably guess what he agathe is. If ho agathos is masculine word and he agathe is now adjective in feminine gender. So the good woman. And notice here you have agathos plus the article also indicates that it's a masculine. And here he and e indicate that we're talking about the feminine adjectives. Now then we have hoi agathoi, as you can see it's a plural masculine, so we would translate the good men or the good people. And hoi nekroi, now nekros is dead, but hoi nekroi then plural masculine, dead people. So in each of these examples, the adjective agathos in its various gender forms is used substantively, and that's why we translate the good man, the good woman, etc. Now, the article can also be used substantively, kind of like analogously with the adjective. So the word ho, which we know is a masculine singular article in nominative case, we could translate it as the man. And if we have, for example, here next, we have the word eyes, we can translate it to the women because it is feminine plural dative form of the article. And finally, we have the plural neuter article, either in nominative or accusative case. So we could translate that as the things. Now, these final articles, as you saw in the previous slide, they can be somewhat tricky, and you always have to rely on the context to determine the meaning of them. Now, to make things a little bit more complicated, what if there is no article before noun or the adjective? Should we translate it as attributive or predicate? So let's take this example. Agathos anthropos. Or we can flip the word order, as is often the case in Greek. You can flip the word order in a very free way. So how should we translate agathos anthropos or anthropos agapos? It can actually be translated as a good man or a man is good. So same way, anthropos agathos, a good man or a man is good. Notice there is no articles in front of either one, the noun or the adjective. And you might ask, how can we know if we should translate it as a good man or a man is good? As attribute or predicate? Now, there's only one answer to that. It needs to be determined from the context. Most of the time, the context gives you a very clear clue which way you should translate that. So both translations are correct, and for example, in an exam, either one of the answers would be perfectly good. So the context becomes your guide and your best friend in translation. So let's look at a summary, and so that we can see the similarities and the differences between the attributive, predicate, and substantive position of the adjectives. So first we have the attributive position. Notice that it can take two different Greek constructions, ho agathos logos or ho logos ho agathos. And the translation in both cases would be the good word. The way to recognize the attributive position is, remember, the triple A rule. So the article always is in front of the adjective, and that's the way we see its attributive position, and we translate it as the good word. Now notice in the second example, even though we have the article here as well, which we don't have to have, but that's where it is now, we still have the article in front of the adjective. So we translate attributively the good word. Then the predicate position. So notice that ho logos agathos or agathos ho logos. And now you can see I have underlined here that the article is in front of the noun. And there is no article in front of the adjective. And either way, the word order is there's an article in front of the noun, but there is no article in front of the adjective. So that's why both of these are analyzed as having the predicate adjective. Therefore, we translated the word is good. And finally, we have the substantive position, where we have just the adjective preceded by the article, just the adjective preceded by the article, and there's no noun that is connected explicitly to the adjective. So we would translate the good woman, in this case, the feminine word, and ho agathos, the good man, in the second example. Finally, remember that there's that situation where we would have an alternative way of looking at the attributive and predicate position if there was no article in front of either noun or the adjective. And in that case, the adjective can be either translated as attributive or the predicate. I didn't put that in this box. There's no room, but you can go to the previous slide and see how it works. So we looked at earlier already how to use lexicons and your textbook vocabulary. So dictionary indicates inflection patterns of adjectives. So a dictionary would give you a nominative form, masculine, feminine, neuter forms, and then it would give you a translation. And if you know the nominative case in masculine, feminine, and neuter, then you would be able to deduce other cases, genitive, dative, and accusative forms of that word. So here's an example. So we have here agathos, agathe, agathon, and translation would be good. So this is what you would see in your textbook vocabulary or in a dictionary. So let me just decipher for you the way that these symbols work and what they mean. So we have the word agathos. Obviously here, I have just written it out. Agathos is this pattern here. Agathe, as you can see here, is the feminine. So agathos is obviously the masculine, and agathe is the feminine. And then you have agathon, which is the neuter form of the word. But looking at this abbreviation in your vocabulary, you should be able to decipher that the first one, agathos, is masculine, agathe is the feminine form, and agathon is the neuter form of the word good. So what the dictionaries are trying to do, they are actually reducing space and saving space and just giving the abbreviation, because it assumes that the one who's using that is able to deduce the rest of the forms. Now, in this second example, we have aionios. Now, the difference here is, and the translation here, eternal. So now we have only two forms, aionios and aionion. So why would that be? So let's take a look at it. So this aionios is both masculine and feminine form. So in other words, there is no specific feminine form of the adjective aionios. It's a little bit strange, but that's the way it is. Now, then we have a distinct neuter form, which is then aionion. And obviously you can recognize that pattern, the neuter pattern on, and the masculine pattern os. Now, the only little bit tricky thing here is to remember that this aionios, the feminine form of the adjective aionios. So if you would have a noun in feminine form attached to the word adjective aionios, then you would use the form aionios. And obviously the translation is eternal. So before we finish off, let's take one practical example from Matthew 6:13 from the Lord's Prayer. Does it make any difference how we understand the adjectives? So Matthew 6:13, kai me eis enenkes hemas eis peirasmon al rysai hemas apotu poneru. So if you look at the different English translations, KJV has deliver us from evil, and NIV and most other translations would have deliver us from the evil one. Now, what's the difference? Is there a difference? Is there any theological implication that arise from this? So the question here would be, is KJV or NIV correct? And if so, one of them, why and what difference does it make? Now, if you look at the actual underlined phrase here, apo tu poneru, is the tu poneru, so poneros is the adjective evil. So is this phrase apo tu poneru, is it, obviously it's adjective, but is it attributive, predicate, or substantive? That would be the question. So article tu would indicate that it is substantive. So the conclusion would be, deliver us from the evil one. So God protects from the devil, but not from all possible evil and harm. Obviously, even theologically, we know that is the case. Due to the fall into sin, God does not protect us from any evil and all harm that is existing in the universe throughout our lives. So after you have gone through the video and maybe you want to go through the textbook again a little bit, start practicing from workbook page 23, parsing and warm-up exercises, and then homework pages 25 and 26, the translation exercises 7, 8, 9, and 10.